Welcome to the Fishing Daily podcast. This is episode 2 of series 4, and today we'll be speaking to Elaine Whyte from the Clyde Fishermen's Association and Clyde Fishermen's Trust, talking about highly protected marine areas. Off the table says Marie McGallan last June, but not really off the table. Is the Scottish Government using a sleight of hand to force HPMAs on the agenda again by using a different name for them? We'll also be discussing the Firth of Clyde seasonal cod closures. The government says it's because fishing puts the cod off their mating habits. We'll also be looking at Scotland's march towards net zero. Traditional sources of food security, fishing and farming is under threat. What will be the consequences for the fishing industry, and if and when net zero legal obligations have to be met? And we'll also be talking about inshore fishermen who are complaining that when they try to give their crab grounds a rest, super crabbers from the south are grabbing their grounds. What can the Scottish Government do about this? And what should they do to protect small-scale fishermen from more powerful fishing vessels? Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you for having me.
Elaine, highly protected marine areas supposedly off the table last June, but we really know that they weren't off the table. Is the Scottish Government, do you think, trying to force them in under a different name?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think we should be aware that some of the policies that are coming forward are going to be concerning for our fishing industry. The ones that we see coming up in the very near future are priority marine feature policies, which are really looking to take small features and protect them, and which fishermen are not against at all, if it's something like a piece of merle or seagrass, etc. However, there is technology like Anchor Lab nowadays that would allow us to fish and avoid those features and cohabit. And I do worry that we've moved from a discussion about protecting a percentage of some features to actually let's protect everything all the time, always, everywhere. And that is a bit of a concern if we don't have a balance with fishermen as well, because I think I'm at a point where I think fishermen should have some protected characteristics as well, because there's communities there that are disappearing, and it's really important we get the balance right. So I worry about PMS approaching. I also worry about things like national marine parks. So in Scotland, the debate on national marine parks is coming forward. They had a biodiversity consultation just a few months ago under the auspices of Minister Slater, which is talking about extending the statutory powers of national parks. Now, we have two in Scotland, but the interesting part of these ones is they're talking about marine parks as well. Certainly, I've understood that Blue Marine are working on guidance for setting up national marine parks, and Argyll and Bute is an area that they have circled. However, nobody has spoken to the fishermen about that. And I think it's really important that we are alert to the fact that national marine parks could be a vehicle for a lot of what was suggested for highly protected marine areas.
Do you think that there should be a deeper involvement? Do you think there should be a representative from the government that maybe has a connection with the fishermen and liaises with them on these issues?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think if you go back maybe about 3 or 4 years when we were working with Minister Ewing, when Fergus Ewing was in position, he was very alive to this type of technology. We were talking about things like Anchor Lab, the Danish system that would allow depth censoring to happen and allow fishing to continue and features to be avoided. This kind of technology absolutely exists. And so I 100% think instead of looking at closing down everything, we should be looking at how things can coexist. Coexistence is what we always talk about, and I think that would be a way forward. And you are right, there's other technologies too. What I am concerned about is that we are looking to close down, and we hear a lot about the precautionary principle. If we don't know a thing, we will take a precautionary principle. We don't have the science precautionary closure. And I think that's a really dangerous precedent to set, because from what I see in the inshore especially, there isn't that will to look at doing the science with fishermen. And you're right, there's a lot of innovative ways that we could do that without costing a lot of money, but would actually protect protect species that we want to protect, but also protect livelihoods as well. But there definitely has to be a better cooperation to use that technology that we have.
I suppose this rolls into the question about the Firth of Clyde seasonal cod closure, where we're seeing 2024, 2025, the same rules is coming back in again. Now, apparently science is saying that fishing, trawling, whatever it is, will be putting off cod from their mating habits. For all these years that this closure has been in place, has there been any real success?
Well, the closure has been in place for about 20 years now, and it was actually brought about by fishermen themselves because, and it was a much smaller area. It was a much smaller, discrete area. I don't think, if you speak to most fishermen now, they would think that the spawning cod has moved. So the areas might not be quite correct anymore. Water temperature, other species moving in, especially hake, has really changed the area, and you would expect it to, but we don't feel that there's science to reflect what's going on. Now, we did start to do trials with the government between about 2016, 2018, working with St Andrews University, and they were unfortunately stopped. But I think that was one of the most useful pieces of collaborative research that we had started. Although you couldn't hang everything on the results because we were starting to work together. And that's, I think I had a vision for a kind of Norwegian style model where we certainly weren't going to use information to campaign. We wanted to develop a relationship with government so that we were producing as reliable science and as regular science as we could. I think it's a great pity that was stopped because there was a high level of trust in that. Now we are in this stage where we feel that it's been a political decision to close the cod box. We done an FOI at the time, and they talked about the Butte House Agreement and the relationship with the Green Party and the traction that some ENGO campaigners had on Twitter. So I think in our heads, there's not any doubt that this was a political decision. And it was brought in very quickly. We've had 2 years since before this closure to work on science, to work on collaboration. And there's been a couple of meetings, but there's not been any more than that. So that's 2 years in our eyes where we could have been doing trials or we could have been working with each other, and it hasn't happened. We have a new inshore minister, Gillian Martin, who has indicated that she wants to work with fishermen, and I recognise this as a historic issue that she is picking up on. But in order to make any changes or work with fishermen, they have to get data. And we have been trying to work with them in observer schemes. I don't think they will be as further as working with St Andrews University was, but we've indicated that we're willing to do whatever we can to help improve the data. However, we're into new closure. It can't be denied that fishermen are angry, let down. And I think as we move forward, we've certainly had members talking about feeling intimidated about the level of surveillance that they're under. It certainly is the first time I've noticed an operation being launched for monitoring. We have a very good record of compliance in our area, and it's the first time that I've seen such an operational scale being launched for monitoring. We are a small area. We have a very much reduced fleet. This seems like a lot of resources to be spent on monitoring boats that are showing a willingness to work. If I'm being honest, I would rather that we worked together on salient data that was going to make a difference to local communities and fishing communities, and to make sure that scientists know what's happening too, so we can inform good management decisions. I think the money's better spent on that than it is in creating this atmosphere where fishermen are feeling slightly intimidated by what's going on.
Well, yeah, just because there's not a lot of fish or of one stock of fish there in an area, it doesn't necessarily mean that we call that you should stop fishing in that area for other species, because fish move. They move grounds as well. They don't always stay in one place, and it is recognised by the government that global warming is happening, and if it's happening, then fish are going to be moving off the grounds into colder waters.
Yeah, Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's what we're seeing. We've always been told that cod are generally found in 4 to 7 degrees, and that doesn't mean discrete populations can't change where they live. But equally, we are seeing other species coming in, and the cod going north is something that they're seeing in Nordic countries too. So this is a general international pattern. But I mean, it also seems a bit strange that we also have seen a change in the TAC for the West Coast cod, which has happened this year for the first time. There is a TAC. And we're hearing that our population in the Clyde is affiliated with the Northwest population and is not now affiliated with the Irish population. And if that's the case, it almost contradicts this policy that we now have this TAC, but we're still gonna enforce this closure. It's not making a lot of sense to fishermen at all. It really isn't.
Do you think it just sounds good for the government to look like they're doing something?
I think I've expressed to our fishermen feel this is very much been a campaign-led approach, and it's to fall in line with the Butte House Agreement. And I do worry that this is something that we're going to see coming to other areas, because it was certainly laid out in the biodiversity strategy, which actually a lot of fishermen wouldn't have responded to because it didn't seem to be a fishing consultation. However, there was quite a lot of detail in there about closing spawning areas, etc. So I would be worried that such an approach would be taken nationally, because it does tick some boxes for some some policy agendas. But for me, it's the opposite of sustainability, because what happens is when you close an area off to fishermen who are fishing this area sparsely, you create a honeypot effect as well. So when it opens up, you see more nomadic boats moving in, the area gets heavily fished. So for me, this is a kind of counterintuitive way to actually have sensible sustainability, and I do think it's a political decision. Yes.
Moving on to the next topic is Scotland's movement towards net zero. Now we're looking at traditional sources of food security, like fishing and farming, and they're under threat from this movement because you need heavy fuel for tractors and boat engines and stuff like that. What do you think the consequences for the fishing industry will be if and when net zero legal obligations come into effect?
I think it's important to say that we should all do our bit, of course, and I think fishermen are one of the first industries that would say that they're doing the most they can. They're producing something with a low carbon footprint in comparison to other food production. They often they're fishing locally, they're catching locally, they're landing locally. So these are all really they should be positives. So they already have quite a low footprint. I think we have to be practical. I mean, we've spoken to people that are developing different types of vessels, using electric power, except solar powers. It's not going to be practical for all boats. So we have to make a decision about whether we actually have food production which is sustainable and is able to sustain communities and the country. And I think that's a really important question right now when we have so much instability in the world. Food security should be something that we're really talking about. I think if our vision for net zero is that we stop all of the boats or all of the tractors right now, and we worry about how we get food later, that doesn't make sense. And I think we are in danger of doing that, because I think we've had a collection of different issues over the years, policies that have reduced people's quota. We've had Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had a lot of things that have taken, we've had a lot of really built embraces protection policies on features. I think there has to be an understanding that there's a tipping point. And whilst we want to do all we can to be sustainable, you can push all of the businesses out of production. And I think that's what the government has to understand with us. We can work to do what is practical, but I think we're endangering Indigenous generation-long communities by pushing forward something that is not practically achievable and also does risk food security for the country.
Along with the food security aspect of it, it's expensive as well, and you are looking at like a couple of million. A boat costs £1 million is going to end up being maybe 3 or 4 million, because the technology that has to go into it is totally different. Do you think that's a reasonable thing to expect for food industries like fishing to have to foot the bill for this?
No, no, and I think I don't think it is. I think in all things that you don't destroy everything that you have in order to create an aspirational vision, because even with that aspirational vision, there's a lot of things that you have to put in place and you have to get right. For instance, if we had boats that I just said, technically I don't think it's possible that a lot of our boats will be going to solar power or anything like that at the moment. But technically you have to think about things like, is there even charging points if you want to go electric? You know, there's infrastructure that's missing. I mean, I don't know about you, but we're certainly seeing more power shortages as more people are driving electric cars. So you have to think about doing this with vessels as well, which are going to have. I mean, I know the lack of infrastructure that a lot of local peers have. How practical is it for them to have that access? I think also you're talking about. I mean, fishermen are generally also very good engineers as well. If they're at sea and there's a problem and they have to change the fuel, they have to fix something, they can do that. If you start to bring this technology in, it's a very different. You might have one person who's a mechanic for these boats and they're on shore. What do you do if you're at sea and you have an emergency situation? And there's one person between all the boats. So there are a lot of things like this that have to be considered. And I think, to be honest with you, pressing ahead without considering those things is not only the cost, which is unworkable, but there's also people's lives at risk. If people are going to go ahead and do this and then they feel unsafe or they aren't able to get their vessel home, those kind of things are really important, and we need to think about human life too.
That's one of the major problems with all this idea of new technology. It's been pushed ahead very, very quickly, and it's not going to be tested to the limits that the technology that's there now at the moment has been.
Yes.
Like, we've seen a lot of development in the past 30, 40 years in order to improve safety on board boats, educating fishermen about what safety is, educating them about engineering on their boats, educating them
Yes.
about a lot of different things, and that all has to be rethought out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I go back to the food security element of things as well. I mean, I think there has to be realization, if you force people down a line that's not practical for them, we risk everyone. We risk our food supply, we risk our economic conditions and local communities. So I think we are not at all unwilling to go to do what we can, but I think there has to be a practical element, and I don't think that's something that's just happening to fishing. I think we're seeing this in farming, we're seeing it in a whole lot of different sectors, that there's a willingness to do what we can, but there has to be a practical element to that as well.
Yeah, that's we're seeing that out on mainland Europe, where you're seeing the farmers and the fishermen coming together and protesting in Germany and countries like that, and Holland. The pressure's huge, and it's a reality for them. It's not just a paper transaction.
Yeah, I mean, I also think we're hearing a lot about carbon disturbance, with some forms of fishing, etc. And there really has to be a lot of work done to that as well, because I'm hearing, that it's been very limited at the moment, and I think certainly for Scotland, the papers that we've read, the evidence of disturbance is happening in far deeper water, in Nordic countries. We don't even have that kind of fishery here. We don't have that kind of depths here. But I think there's a lot of citizen science happening to talk about disturbance of carbon, and there's also a lot of the carbon credit work that's happening. I think we really have to be mindful of this, because firstly, citizen science, I think, has its place, but also has its limitations, severe limitations. And I think we can't just run with that type of stuff. We have to do proper science if we want to, and it has to be over a length of time. And again, it has to be in balance with what you could be impacting if you stop fishing in certain areas. But I think also the carbon credit thing worries me, where we're talking about rewilding for larger corporations, and we're starting to see more of this happening. It certainly happened in Australia, where companies might come in and buy a piece of land and plant trees, or they might come in and plant seaweed, or whatever they do. But if that is displacing local fishing, our local economic, socio-economic needs, I do worry that it's almost like a green colonialism, and that you're going to be impacting local communities with something like for a carbon credit scheme for a big international company, which is doing local communities no good. And we need to be really careful about that.
Well, it's one thing that's about science. What's true today in science is going to be debunked tomorrow. So I always say to people, be careful about what you actually believe as science. Once upon a time, we're being told that trawling causes more carbon and carbon disturbance than what airplanes was doing, air travel was doing. But yet now, if you look at air travel, it's creates something between 4 to 6% of the industrial carbon that's in the world and the atmosphere. So, it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, really.
Yeah, policy by sound bites is always something that I worry about, and I think we have to be careful not to veer into that space.
Yeah. Inshore fishermen are complaining that they are trying to give their crab grounds a rest. We've seen a lot of issues recently where fishermen are saying that the crab stocks are on the wane. So some of them are trying to give their grounds a rest, but they're complaining that bigger crabbers from other areas are coming in and claiming their grounds when they try to do this. Is this something that the Scottish Government should be looking at as well?
Yeah, the Scottish Government have started to talk to fishermen through the IFG about measures to help with crab stocks and lobster stocks. I mean, I guess from my side, the thing that I would point out is the science that we're working on is about 7 years old. So it came from an ICIS report, which was informed by Marine Scotland study. So again, we go back to this, let's work on the science. And if you speak to people like Duncan McInnes in the Western Isles, he's working with St Andrews University and trying to obtain a lot more knowledge about local stocks. And I think that's what we should be doing. These schemes are not expensive, but they're invaluable. So I think there's a will around certainly with the fishermen I work with to help to collate that data so that we actually know where stocks are. What we are hearing is that, as you would expect, every region is different. So we're hearing some regions may be having an issue with brown crab, or other regions not so much. Certainly with the lobster stocks, I'm hearing that they are increasing in a lot of areas. So I think it's like all things. We have regional IFG, so we can find regional solutions that make sense for those areas. So I think a one-size-fits-all policy won't work. And we certainly in the Clyde have had a pot limitation scheme in for some time, which does in a way. We would like to see it enforced. We'd like to see tagging, those kind of things happening. But we've taken steps already to kind of to measure that. We think it's up to each regional area to try and make sure that they're working to data and bring in steps that are sensible for them. But in terms of the nomadic crabbers, yeah, that's definitely an issue for a lot of communities. It certainly is. And I think there's a strong feeling in many quarters that something has to be looked at in terms of sustainability in that area before penalising small fishermen who are probably, who are local and probably not having as much of an impact as some of the larger boats that are nomadic and coming in might have. So, and you are right, there seems to be little sense in asking small local boats to move gear or limit gear whenever they do, that area is just used and is actually fished heavier. So yeah, certainly that's something for the government to think about, and I know that's something that local fishermen are bringing forward. Let's deal with the larger problems, and let's let regional fishermen input to the science and decide what would work best for the area based on that science.
When you don't have everybody working off the same sheet, it's very difficult for fish stocks to recover if one's been told to do one thing and one is able to do another thing. So it's a problem in areas. Suppose one last question: where is your members with the offshore wind farms? Is there going to be an impact in the Clyde region?
Yes, there will be. I mean, we've already seen what's happening to the offshore wind farms on the East Coast. and the displacement that's caused to local inshore fishermen. So yeah, there's definitely going to be an impact west coast as well as ScotWind rolls out. So we have a site at Isla, but you're going to see a lot of cables going through the Clyde for that as well. So the cabling and the increased traffic of boats round about the harbours, etc., for maintenance is definitely. I mean, that's the one thing that most people don't think about, because what we've heard in the East Coast is even just trying to get berths in certain places is an issue since the wind farm boats are there. So yeah, I mean, this is going to be an increasing issue for most areas, I think. But certainly we're looking at the Isla project and the impacts that's likely to have on cabling throughout the Clyde. But also for our boats that fish around there. Yeah, definitely is an issue.
Has there been any conversation with yourselves as an association, Fishermen's Association, about this?
Yeah, there has. I mean, we try and keep in contact with the renewable companies, as we keep in contact with cable companies and anybody who's operating in that area. But I think obviously the report that the NFO and ASFF done, the Spatial Squeeze report, which came out I think last year, is very accurate, and more so probably for the inshore, because obviously renewables is not coming by itself. We have renewables, we have the cables that we already have down, we have Royal Navy, we have aquaculture sites, we have now PMFs and potential national marine parks, MPAs. There has to be a way to figure out how this jigsaw goes together, and there has to be a way to ensure that wild fishing has a space as well, because the pressure on it is only going to increase.
We're also going to see an expansion of aquaculture as well, which is also going to put another pressure on, especially the inshore areas, and maybe force a lot of the smaller boats into areas that they weren't in before.
Yeah, and I think this is something we really have to think carefully about. I mean, when I was in Norway, they were talking about if aquaculture came, if a proposal was coming forward, it was essential that it would go through the local fishermen's councils before being approved. We don't have that same type of system here. If someone has a license and you have a license, well, if they're granted, if an aquaculture site is granted a license, then that is it, is going in. So I think the socio-economic policies are not sufficiently targeted towards ensuring that we still have wild fisheries. I mean, of course, I would, I think there's ways to collaborate and coordinate, but I think we have to be getting that message across to government and local councils as well, that we want to see new industries coming in, but we don't want to see them displacing others. And there must be a way to keep them both going, because we're not totally against aquaculture. I mean, aquaculture supplies jobs for young people, and a lot of our fishermen have got sons and daughters who work in the industry, and it's something that we're glad to see that there is rural employment, because it is an issue, but it has to be a sustainable balance, and it can't be at the cost of displacing people who have been there for a long time.
It's about coexisting and realize things can't trample over one thing and the other without having an effect somewhere along the line.
I think it comes down to socioeconomics of fishing. I think it's a difficult thing for a lot of local councils or maybe central government to get their head around about how important just one boat is. Because as I said, if you lose 4 people off of a boat, that's 4 families impacted, and it might mean 2 families moving away. We don't know, but that socioeconomic footprint of the importance of that boat to that community is really important. And I think if you're bringing in international organisations and they're talking about investment in the area, it always sounds really shiny. But you need to think about how much of that investment is actually going to stay in the area, and how much of that investment will displace other investment, which is potentially a longer term option for the local community. So I think that socioeconomic assessment has to get stronger, has to get more insightful.
2024 is upon us. Is there any big events coming up for the Clyde Fishermen's? Is there anything on the calendar that people should be looking out for during the year?
No, I mean, not specifically. I guess we will be doing, we'll probably be doing a festival at some point, probably in September. So we would ask people to keep an eye out for that, and we always welcome everybody along. It's always a great day. So keep an eye on that for posters. But in terms of policy movements, I would say keep an eye on national marine parks, keep an eye on PMFs. I think I know that the government, the public have given their support to us over highly protected marine areas, and nobody wants to lean too heavily on people's goodwill. But what I will say is, that if the threat hasn't went away and it's just changed names, then we might have to come out and ask the public to support us again. And we really are grateful for the understanding that people have developed, and for skipping Inish in their songs, which helped to raise the profile a great bit. So I would say, yeah, to the public, just keep an eye on what's happening with your fishermen, and thank you for your support. And we may need to call on you again.
Well, Elaine, thank you for joining us here today. And as usual, it's been very educational to find out what's happening around the Clyde area. And we'll have you back again, because there's always something new coming down the line, isn't there?
Thank you very much, Oliver. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.